and it's 1 o'clock. So I want to welcome everyone to another conversation with the council president. I'm Felicia Moore, your Atlanta City Council president. Want to thank you all for coming. Hope everybody had a great and safe Labor Day weekend. As you all know, we have these conversations. Sometimes I have a guest on. Today you have me. And so you'll see me looking around because we are streaming live on Facebook as well as on my YouTube channel for those people who always want to tune in but say, hey, I'm not on Facebook. And so you have an opportunity to tune in as well. I want to let you know that I will check and answer questions that I receive from Facebook. So that's where you'll see me looking down. Oh, yeah, Walter. He says, can we talk about crime? This is out of control right now. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. And then if you see me looking over here, I'm looking at my screen so I can see if I have questions from YouTube visitors. But let's get started because we've got time to talk and I don't want to waste any of it. Many of you saw that I issued a statement following this weekend's activities for Labor Day. Just want to go, I'm not going to read the whole statement, but I do want to hit some points. One, and the very first one I like to do is to commend our public safety personnel. And that is our police officers, the people who take the 911 calls, the people who dispatch them, the officers and all the different units that were working heavily this weekend, the fire department, the Grady EMS, and the list goes on and on. Really thank you all for all you do. I was monitoring a lot of the traffic that was going on between them during the weekend. And I just want you all to know they work extremely hard and they have worked hard in trying to respond to requests. And that's responding to the requests. Some of the things that were going on, which most of you experienced in one way or the other, were the street racers. That is eating up a lot of our police time and resources, running from location to location, stalking them out, knowing that they're going to show up at locations. And as soon as the police are there or they recognize the police are already there, they move on. Parties that were taking place all over the place. Off-road vehicles as well as the cars, noise complaints, a large number of noise complaints, as well as nightclub concerns. You all have seen about the shooting at the Cheetah nightclub, where there were other nightclub concerns, or people just out in the street. I mean, that they've had to go and clear the streets. And so there were two parts of my concern. One about the crime and everything that was taking place in the gatherings, but two, the fact that people were packed in like sardines inside and outside of nightclubs, on the street, no mask and no precautions for COVID. And the majority of these people that I was seeing were in the 18 to 29-year-old age range. They were having a good life. They were partying. And my concern is they are going to go home to their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, brothers, aunties, great grandmas, and they could be asymptomatic for COVID, or they could have contracted it in the large crowds that they have been in, and I'm sure more of. And so I'm encouraging them, and I'm serious about this, to self-quarantine. If you were out in any of these parties and groups, protests, all of those, particularly if you weren't wearing a mask and you weren't social distancing, and in these party scenes, I saw none of that. Self-quarantine and go and find a test site and get yourself tested, because it's not only for you, but also for the ones that you love. And in our African-American community, COVID is wreaking havoc. It may not have hit you or your family yet, but it is wreaking havoc. And we need to get to our youth and our younger people and making sure they're taking the precautions. And then if you have someone in that age range, find out what they were doing this weekend before you're in their presence for a long period of time, and particularly in their presence without social distancing and wearing a mask until they get tested. I'm really concerned about that. So let me get a couple of questions And I know, let's see, my staff will be posting things. I just want to make sure. Yeah, the crime stats. It's the crime stats is one thing, Walter, but for me, it's what's really happening on the ground. So, I don't need a crime stat to tell me street racers are out of control, shootings are out of control, murders are out of control, noise complaints are out of control. All of those things, we don't need that. And I want to say this to people too, because some people think it's in one area or the other. Sometimes some neighborhoods scream louder than others, but the activity we're talking about is happening. There's not a quadrant of this city that's not experiencing these type of issues. Not one. From Buckhead to Hollowell Parkway, aka Bankhead Highway, to Southeast Atlanta, Southwest Atlanta, it's taking place all over the street, all over. Yeah, so somebody said there was even a drive-by in Adair Park. Let's see, it's kind of hard to make sure I'm not missing something. This is a long one. I don't know whose post that is. Okay. Oh, Walter, that was your thing with the crime stats. Thanks for posting that. I can't read it now, but people can check that out. And it is a long list. Thank you, Walter, for sharing that information. So let's break it down. I want to make sure I don't get any questions before I go in. Okay, so Jamie says that we may have to enforce these establishments to enforce masks and restrict number of people in spaces. And I'm having my staff, we're working on doing a little bit of research on that now to see exactly what the governor's order said. And I think we just probably were waiting on the answer. We might just need to go find it ourselves and get the most recent governor order and see how it regulates nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. I think that they were loosened a little of the restrictions, but some of the Instagram, and this is all over social media, so I'm not coming up with anything new. You can see pictures inside and outside of clubs where people are packed in like sardines, hundreds of people. And so that can't be a good thing, particularly in the COVID environment. And I do think enforcement of that would be good. But let's be clear about enforcement. And that's why I mentioned the street racers earlier, is because as I monitored what was going on over the weekend, there was a lot of resources and a lot of police that were responding to noise complaints, either from the racers or noise complaints from parties and or following these street racers around. So when we're talking about enforcement, we've got to understand that we only have so many officers. We do know that we have lost some officers in recent months. And so the resources of the police department only go so far, and you can only enforce so many things at so many times, in addition to just the everyday calls that they are receiving for service throughout the city. So I do think that we need to do that. So as far as party houses, as you all know, Councilmember Howard Shook has put in some legislation to ban the Airbnb, the short-term rental companies, from being able to use them in residential areas as a way to get at these people who are renting them and having the party houses. So that discussion will be taking place next week. Well, not next week, it'll be over a period of time, because it's actually a change to the zoning code, which will require it to go to the neighborhood planning units, then the zoning review board, and then back to council through the zoning committee. So if you are active, and if you're not, you should be, your NPUs, they are meeting remotely, you should be able to go and voice your concerns on that. So someone is asking, are the fire marshals enforcing capacity rules? That's a good question. And I think that that is a resource that we certainly should be tapping into, because I believe, as I look at the pictures, they can't be at capacity. If something were to break out in some of these nightclubs, I can just see people being trampled and seriously hurt. So I will be looking into that, and my staff will make a note of that to see what our fire inspectors are doing. Thank you, Jamie and Stephanie, for mentioning that. That's a good idea. So, drive-by shootings are up in neighborhoods in Southwest Atlanta, and that's why I want people to understand it's not just an issue in one neighborhood or another. The drive-by shootings are happening in Southwest Atlanta. They're happening in Northeast and Northwest Atlanta. For some reason, everybody has picked up these guns and are shooting them everywhere. I just saw a post where, like at 5 o'clock this morning, there was just random gunfire, and nobody knows exactly who or why these people are doing it. So that is another thing that is going on in the city. So what can be done? So for me right now, I'm doing a lot of research, having my staff look into some issues. I plan on issuing some statements on a couple of these things, but I do believe, and I have had a conversation with our chair of public safety, as well as others, on some specific issues where I've had business owners reach out to me about crime. I've been working with a business owner on Northside Drive. That kind of prompted me, as you all remember, I put out the statement about the water boys. That was kind of where it started for me over on Northside Drive. And then I started getting complaints in other areas. So I'm trying to get around to people, but I will be meeting with them about some specific suggestions. But on the street racers, yeah, Edgewood Avenue, Walter Sane was also one, and zoning inspectors at Deer Park. So yeah, it's been happening everywhere. Let me double check. I don't want to leave out my people on YouTube. Uh, Mr. Jerry, thank you for thanking me for my statement. Um, uh, okay, someone is saying our ancestries and slavery caused most of these problems. And outside of Labor Day, Jerry says, I have noticed cars with muffled motors that sound like race cars. I can hear cars 2 blocks away. Sounds like Atlanta Motor Speedway. What can be done? Yes, Jerry, that is a part of the street racing effort that I'm just getting ready to address. There is state law related to the type of mufflers and that kind of thing. So we're doing a research on that, as well as a state representative, as well as some other elected officials, frankly, have reached out to me about the concern about the street racers. And I'm having conversations and need to follow up on that because they were going to be meeting with some other state legislators to see what we can do. In terms of the street racers, what I believe is one solution is you kind of always have to hit people where their pockets is. You know, locking people up didn't always solve the issue because, you know, you get locked up, you probably get out on bond and you go back and you get in your car and you do it again. What I wanted to look at, and I'm talking with a state representative about, is trying to look at what we can do with the confiscation, I guess that's the word, of cars, and giving cities and police departments the ability to be able to confiscate the cars, destroy the cars, or otherwise get rid of them, but to take them away from their owners. I don't know if we can do it or not. So these are just raw thoughts. Every good idea is not as simple as it seems. There's legal issues, etc. But I do think that the cars need to be targeted. Let me see. I see you all are chiming in. So we're talking about the idea about the marshals, zoning inspectors. We'll look at that as well. All right, now I've seen 5 locations. I saw another good. More funding for mental health and education. We must stop funding stuff that's not working. Time for new, young, fresh ideas. Ms. Howe, I agree with you. And I think mental health funding is one of those issues that cuts across a lot of the things that we have, from people who are unsheltered living on our streets to crime. A lot of it is mental health issues. And the state, we've got to get them involved in getting some mental health funding. And we need to make sure that we are wrapping those services around what we do as a city. Jay Wesley, how are you? The Marquette on Boone and Laurie is out of hand. He says he lives on that block and they fight every weekend. It's all over social media, making our city look bad globally. I'm going to follow up with some social media links. So Jay Wesley, I've seen your link. I saw a couple other links, and every link I see from that club, it just is a brawl. It's people are just brawling outside of it. I don't know what's going on. Well, I think I saw one from inside the club too. And it is an issue, and I don't know why they don't have security. I'm not quite sure what's going on in or with the patrons of the club, that they feel a need to fight and pummel each other every time. But it's just a fights breaking out, and it is a situation that license and permit should be looking at. The other thing is looking at some of these clubs, and I've gotten not only from your club that you talk about on Marquette, but on other sides of town where some of these nightclubs are a bit out of control, or the patrons are. There are a lot of shootouts or other activities taking place inside and outside of the clubs. And if you have those issues, I would strongly suggest that you talk to your zone commander in your police zone, but also contact license and permits, because they're the ones who are supposed to be keeping their eye on them, enforcing them. And I think that we need to revisit our alcohol license code to allow some of the nuisance complaints as well as citizens complaints to be able to bring some of these license holders to bear about the activities that's taking place in and around their club. Let's see. Make sure I'm not missing anybody. Club 1145 is packed to the point the crowd blocks Peachtree Street. I know I've seen pictures of that. Fielded a lot of complaints about that. I've heard the police, they are doing their best to try to keep the traffic controlled in and around there. And that's why we really need to look at what are the COVID restrictions, and if we can get resources to help with that. Okay, it says the Marquette is left alone because they are paid off-duty APD inside and they don't call for backup. And I'm finding a lot of our nightclubs do have off-duty APD officers, yet we still have a lot of lawlessness in and around there. And that is something, if my staff is listening, would you please make a note for me to discuss to call the chief and see what we can do to make a better sync between those officers that are working off duty with those who are on duty to help to curb some of these things, because they certainly can't be in a place where they ignore these situations. So I will be making that call. Thank you for bringing that up. Issues, Jamie, issues regarding Zone 6 and all other zones, please email me. And thank you. Your email is there and people can do that. Zone commanders need to be aware of these officers. I agree. And maybe we should talk as well. Because, if you're on duty, if you're off duty, you're still wearing your Atlanta Police insignia, you still are using Atlanta Police equipment. We ought to be doing this in a synchronized way. And if you are doing off-duty office and you are in a club and there's illegal activity going on and you're not acting on that, then maybe they shouldn't have an off-duty officer at the club. Maybe they should have their own, some private security. Are there enough officers working to respond to backup calls? So I do know that there has been a lot of backup in terms of response time for 911 calls as well as calls for service, because when all of these calls come in, and I just want to make sure. Calls as well as calls for service, because when okay, I hear myself. When all of these calls are coming in, they have to prioritize them because there are only so many officers on the street at one time. And when they prioritize them, they go to what they would consider the most serious and life-threatening first. So then means some of these other calls get backed up. And we've had situations over the weekend where there were a lot of calls waiting for service and people having to wait, a couple hours or more for an officer to respond. So what we have experienced, as you know, since all of the protests have happened and we've had officer involved shooting here in Atlanta and a lot of the protests and things, we have also seen reports where we have been losing officers because of police morale and other issues. So, yes, Jamie is saying there's other officers like Apex on the street, and they have been augmenting with several people, but it's rough, and that's why we don't need to continue to add to what they have to do with street racers and chasing them all over the city when you can use those officers to be dealing with some of these other issues. But we can always use more officers out to respond to calls, but we have what we have and we have to deal with what we have to deal with. But right now, what we've got to do is one, I believe that one of the issues that we have is that we have a lot of different neighborhoods because a lot of you all tag me to death. Facebook ought to have the most tagged person award. I probably get tagged on Facebook in so many different groups and from different people. So I get to hear and see what's going on in different neighborhood groups and across the city. And one thing that needs to happen is people need to understand that no matter what side of town you live on, you're probably dealing with the same issue. And so bringing everybody together, LOL, I see you tagged 100 times a day. Probably, yes. But I think that people need to start talking across the city and reaching out to your neighbors and other neighborhood groups, because bringing all of these voices together collectively, I think some neighborhoods feel like they're neglected or they're not getting response or it's just happening to me. But the one thing that's in common with all neighborhood groups, everybody feels the same way. It's just that everybody is not connected together. And my staff, we had a conversation, particularly when the conversation was around defund the police. I pulled together, invited neighborhood planning unit chairs from across the city. I didn't get all of them, probably about a little over half, just to have a discussion. And I think that those are the kinds of things in my office. We will be planning another one of those conversations with neighborhood to just have a conversation, because people are not having this across the board. So if you see, I do these conversations on a weekly basis. Please make sure you're sharing, liking my page so people will join in the conversation, so people can hear, because I have people, the ones of you that are responding here, that are across the city. And I think that's good so that other people I can hear. So Jay Wesley says, should I just move? I'm tired. Well, I've been hearing that too across the city. People are getting fed up. If misery loves company, I will tell you that everybody is a bit miserable across the city about the crime. And if Atlanta wants to have company, understand that these issues are taking place metro-wide. Street racers are not just in the city of Atlanta, they're in their neighboring jurisdictions as well. And if the metro area and the state wants to have misery company, this is happening across the country. I have a conversation at least maybe every other week with council presidents from across the country. and all of us are talking about the same very issues that we're facing in our community. Right now, the environment with COVID, the crime and the uptick in crime, some are having even more problems with protests in terms of the violence and property destruction, and just the ongoing nature of it that we're having here in Atlanta, but not to the extent as we see. Um, let's see. So, these are conversations we have to have. I want you to know, as president, I am doing my best to keep my ears and eyes open for what's going on and trying to be responsive, as well as working, as I told you, on a few things to try to see if we can come up with some solutions. I love conversations like this because, you know, touching base with the fire department, I will be calling Chief Slaughter to see if we can bring them into the mix in the conversation around making sure these nightclubs are safe in terms of capacity. So you all have good ideas because sometimes when you're in the middle of the forest, you don't see every single tree, and it's always good to touch base with citizens and get your input. Let's see. Let me go to YouTube before we start to wrap up. I'm sorry. I don't want to miss. Um, the city has never been so dirty, Jerry says. Why am I seeing so much litter in every part of the city? And part of that reason is because, unfortunately, due to COVID and maybe other issues, but that in particular, our public works department has been pretty hit by that. And so we're not seeing the cleanups that we are seeing. We don't use or have, the corrections department that we used to lean on to give inmates work release time to come out and help us delitter our streets. And that is one issue. The yard trimmings haven't been picked up, and hopefully in this cycle of City Utility Committee, they will get an answer as to when and how they will start picking those things up. You have to call for your appointment for bulk pickup, and that may take a while. The city's just experiencing some issues, and that's why Public Works is having a hard time, which is really where we would go to for help with that. Thank you. Veronica says, I have reported through Atlanta 311. However, the temporary plates are just damaging. We need to get permanent solutions. And then you want me to address homelessness. So all I can tell you on the metal plates is to continue to call 311, follow up, tell them that hasn't been resolved. Sometimes the plates are out there for an extended period of time because one crew will come and do something and they're waiting on someone else. And then other times it's just because they're backlogged. I'm not quite sure which your issue is, but please continue to call 311. I'm glad you brought up the issue of people without homes. And I know that I'm beginning to receive issues and complaints for people, under the overpass downtown, the tent city has grown. There are more people, there's trash, there's this, or people, when I go to meetings, they're complaining about homeless encampments or whatever. So let me say this on a few areas. One, I understand the aesthetic look. I understand that people don't want to look at people who are in these encampments. I understand the trash and the health issues that could cause. However, in the city of Atlanta, during an executive order or administrative order the mayor had during this COVID situation, we have started to stand down on removing homeless encampments. And that's mainly because, we are displacing people and shuffling them around. Because if you move them, they're going to come back, or they're going to go set up somewhere else, or they're more likely going to come back to those locations. That's one issue. The other one is some of them are set up on state property, which is under some of the overpasses. The state periodically does come and displace the people, but they come right back and clean up. The other issue is, while I'm hearing two different things, because I do try to keep up with Partners for Home and some of the homeless issues, they're saying on one hand, they do have beds and locations where homeless can go, but you have a population of chronically homeless people who do not, for various reasons, want to go in a shelter environment. And frankly, during this COVID situation, they feel safer on the street than to be housed with a lot of people. So that is an issue. What was Ms. Howell mentioned earlier, we have a lot of people who have mental health issues that frankly need treatment and need to be housed or need to be in places where they can receive the adequate treatment that they can deserve. So you got those that will never go into a facility because they don't want to follow the rules, or the barriers to get in them are so high that they can't reach them. Barriers meaning they may tell them you can't drink, you cannot be high, um, you have to be a certain age or a certain group. There are barriers. You may have to have a job, you may have to be in by a certain time and out by a certain time. So different shelters have different rules. Some of them I don't like, but they do. And so some people just don't even want to fool with that. They would prefer, particularly since the climate is warm, they prefer to stay on the street. So let me just add one other layer to that. I know we're over time, but this is really important. We really have to keep our eye open on this issue of evictions. While we see homelessness now, and if some of you follow me, this is pre-COVID. I have been warning everyone that we are going to see the record number of people homeless or without homes, unsheltered on our streets that we haven't seen. And this is before COVID, I was warning. And if you want to see what is to come, Google Los Angeles, San Diego, Seattle, homelessness, and you will see it. It is coming our way. And now that COVID has hit us and people will soon be evicted, we are just kicking the can down the road, which is a good can to kick. I'm not evicting people, but when those balloon payments of all of the back rent comes due and people are not able to pay it, or the landlord, maybe not a big investor, but a smaller investor who's not been able to pay their mortgage, ends up with their house in foreclosure and they have to evict someone, we're going to see more and more people on the streets. And so I'm hopeful that with the CARES Act dollars and others, our administration and others are looking proactively at trying to find places, because we're going to find a lot of recently homeless people. And those are the people that you can rapidly rehouse and help them get on their feet so that they can move on. But there will always be a group of the more chronically homeless people that are not and will not move. And I know I've said a lot, but it is a humanitarian issue. It's a social issue. And I just hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the worst is yet to come. So let me check my comments because I've seen them moving while I've been rambling. And okay, so someone is asking me, what is your stance on Georgia State Patrol recklessly not abiding by APD pursuit chases? I'm not quite sure what that means, but I do know that our police department does not do chases. The state patrol does chases, and you might have to email me, or I'll have to try to figure out exactly what you were saying. Not a crime related, but do you have an idea when the city will turn over management for our local tennis centers to tennis management companies so that our children can get back? The city council voted down awarding the contract to Agape. because the community wanted UTA to continue operating. And so right now it's at a stalemate because the administration now has to decide whether they will rebid it. If they rebid it, it could come back to be Agape and we could be in the same spot, or UTA might win it, which will make everybody happy. But right now, the attendance centers will be as they are at this very moment with our Parks and Recreation staff, because the council cannot just arbitrarily award it to UTA. It has to be a recommendation that comes from a fair procurement department. Also, people have to understand at some point, when contracts do come in, they have to rebid them. And so that's how we've gotten in this situation. I am getting the wrap up because I am so far beyond my time. Let me check YouTube because I don't want to be unfair to you. I think I got everybody on YouTube. So this has been a big discussion. I know I've put a lot in there in a little time. I would encourage you to continue to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my YouTube channel. Please share my information. I wasn't able to get to everything. We will have, again, another conversation. You can always reach out to my office. They will put my contact information by email or by phone. I hope everyone stays safe. I really, really want to remind you before I go, if you have not already, please fill out your 2020 census. We need to make sure we get those numbers up in the city of Atlanta so we can get the federal dollars we deserve to serve you. Also, make sure you apply for your absentee ballot so you can get that in early and you can get your ballot. You can drop it off at a drop box or you can mail it in. But the sooner you can do it, the more secure your vote will be. You all take care, stay safe, and thank you.